a story set far in the future. A woman explains that thousands of years ago the first explorers left Earth and formed the League of Free Worlds. Some of them found planets bathed in sunlight and warmth, while others had to settle on planets shrouded in clouds, where most of the land was covered in swamps. On the swamp-covered planet, the inhabitants built a city where order and prosperity were maintained through absolute governmental control. Anyone who refused to conform was sentenced to death. One such dissenter was Christie, who was captured and meant to be executed. However, since executions were not practiced on this planet, Christie, along with 10 high-risk prisoners, was sentenced to lifelong exile in the swamp regions. If they were lucky, they might reach Paradise Island, a mythical place, as no one had ever successfully made it there. The swamps were teeming with deadly creatures. As the prisoners prepared for their final journey, a captain brought forward one of them whose head was covered with a cloth and ordered them to step forward. This prisoner first inquired about a security barrier before doing something clever and realizing they were being set up. There was something invisible ahead. The captain then ordered the barrier to be deactivated, read out the sentence, removed the cloth from the prisoner's head, and instructed his subordinates to hand over a metal crate containing minimal survival gear. The prisoners were given 1 hour to leave, or they would be shot on sight. One of the female prisoners became hysterical, claiming she was just a tourist and didn't deserve this punishment. She attempted to flee, but Christie quickly caught and calmed her down. The prisoner, who had been covered with a cloth, then suggested that they introduce themselves. He started by revealing his name, Irvin. However, a large, muscular, bald man named Use, known as the Arctic Wolf, took charge. He claimed to know a lot about the swamps, as this was not his first exile. The wolf expressed his desire to learn everything about the other prisoners, but their introductions were interrupted by the sudden appearance of a deadly predator called a saurut. The creature hunted by sensing vibrations underground and dragging its prey beneath the surface. Despite Use's confidence in his own abilities, Christie insisted on following Irvin. Irvin suggested that they divide the supplies and quickly opened the crate, taking the most essential item, a knife. The others followed suit, scrambling for the contents. This enraged Use, who once again asserted his authority, but Irvin ignored him. Instead, Irvin declared that he would be heading toward Paradise Island. Christie joined Irvin, hoping to secure their share of supplies before parting ways. Unfortunately, Use's group attempted to claim all the equipment for themselves. However, Irvin quickly issued a warning, reminding them that any attempt by prisoners to kill each other would result in being shot on the spot. With no other choice, the Arctic Wolf handed over some supplies, including a portion of food, to Irvin and Christie. Since it wasn't enough, Irvin demanded the metal crate, offering all of his and Christie's food in exchange. Use agreed without hesitation and immediately ordered his group to move forward. Christie asked Irvin to help the tourist woman Maria, but he refused, implying that Maria was already as good as dead given her condition. Irvin then explained that Christie needed to walk ahead because her light body weight would make it easier for him to pull her out if she sank into the mud. At that moment, a voice from the fortress ordered all prisoners to stay away from the perimeter. Use led his group forward, while Irvin and Christie secured the crate with ropes and began moving as well. Suddenly, gunfire erupted from the fortress, forcing the prisoners to take cover behind rocks. Irvin realized that he was the target and urgently told Christie to crawl out of the danger zone. On their journey, Christie became anxious upon spotting a small crawling creature, but Irvin reassured her that it wasn't dangerous and could even be eaten in an emergency, an idea that disgusted her. Eventually, they reached a relatively safe spot and observed Use's group following their path. Christie noticed how Irvin carefully calculated everything from the start and always found a way to solve each problem. Curious, she began to wonder who Irvin really was before his exile. She also voiced her doubts about the existence of Paradise Island, but Irvin pointed out that if the island didn't exist, the government lackeys wouldn't be trying to kill him. Even though this was Irvin's first time in the swamp, he was confident he could find the way. Meanwhile, the captain received a reprimand from the president, as his former advisor was still alive. It was revealed that one of the prisoners, Matthias, was actually an undercover sergeant sent to eliminate the former advisor, but had failed. The captain assured the president that the swamps were impassable, making it impossible for the advisor to survive. Back in the swamps, Christie and Irvin discovered a stream where they could wash up. As Christie rinsed her face, reflecting on her misfortune, Irvin suddenly appeared and warned her to stay still. There was a saurut nearby. Irvin engaged the creature, and with Christie's help, they managed to kill it. As a gesture of gratitude, Christie treated Irvin's wounds while sharing her backstory. She revealed that she was imprisoned for killing her husband, who happened to be an inspector. Meanwhile, Yus's group emerged from behind the rocks, intent on reclaiming the metal crate. However, Irvin picked up a severed piece of the saurut that Christie had cut and turned it into an electric whip, threatening Yus's group. Realizing the disadvantageous situation, Yus decided to let Irvin and Christie go, but he and his group continued to track their movements. Irvin revealed that near the rotten shore, there was a place where former prisoners lived, and Yus was their leader. Meanwhile, Yus himself continued tracking Irvin, hoping he would fall into the swamp's traps first. However, Irvin was not only intelligent, but also highly observant. He quickly noticed the presence of a saurut lurking underground and urged Christie to lie down and stay still. In contrast, Yus's group failed to recognize the danger and was ambushed, with several members falling victim to the predator. Meanwhile, the president contacted the captain again to ensure that the necessary measures had been taken. His men were already tracking the prisoners through the swamp. Back with Irvin and Christie, they decided to rest. Irvin offered to share his story with Christie on one condition. She had to solve a riddle. A little girl is short 10 coins to buy a chocolate bar, while a boy is short just 1 coin. How much does the chocolate bar cost? Unfortunately, Christie fell asleep before answering. Sometime later, a loud rumbling noise woke Christie. It was a swarm of vicious little creatures. Irvin immediately instructed her to hide inside the metal crate. Using this method, they managed to survive the attack. Once the creatures left, they climbed out, and Christie finally understood the true purpose of the crate. Curious, she asked about the riddle's answer, proving she had been listening all along. The chocolate bar cost 10 coins. The girl had no money at all. Since they no longer needed the crate, they left it behind and soon reached the swamp's water-covered region. Meanwhile, the remaining members of Yus's group continued to track Irvin. When Yus decided to take a break, a female prisoner named Layla objected, warning that they might lose Irvin and Christie's trail. In her frustration, she accidentally blurted out that Irvin was the former presidential advisor. Realizing her mistake, she fled, causing chaos among the group. During the commotion, Yus got stuck in the mud, but another prisoner, Jan, helped pull him out. That night, Irvin and Christie rested again. This time, Irvin forced Christie to eat one of the small creatures while finally revealing his past. He confessed that he had been the president's advisor, but the corruption of the system had tormented his conscience. So he gathered vast amounts of information to expose the government's lies. When the authorities realized they couldn't quietly eliminate him, they had him arrested and exiled to the swamp. However, before his capture, Irvin had managed to plant a virus in the government system, one that could only be deactivated with a specific code, a code that only he possessed. His goal was to bring down the system so that the people could rebuild their society with true freedom. Christie was convinced that the government would stop at nothing to hunt him down, but Irvin remained confident. By the time they caught up, he would already be on Paradise Island. Meanwhile, in the city, the system began to malfunction. Communication satellites had failed. At dawn, Layla and those who had abandoned Yus's group encountered the cannibals. Upon hearing their screams, Christie cursed whoever had created this punishment. Irvin admitted that he was the one responsible, believing it to be a more humane alternative. Enraged, Christie lashed out at him, telling him to burn himself alive so no one could ever retrieve the code. Overcome with emotion, Erwin joined her, shouting for the cannibals or Saurit to come and end his life. When things calmed down, Christie confessed that she had been offered freedom in exchange for killing Erwin, but she refused. Sometime later, Yus found the remaining members of his group hiding behind rocks to escape the cannibals. Layla revealed the deal she was given. If she managed to kill the former presidential advisor, a plane would come to retrieve her. Yus ordered his men to search her for any tracking sensors, but Layla fled, only to fall into a deadly swamp fungus trap. Realizing their spy was dead, the captain armed Sergeant Matthias and sent him to hunt down Erwin. Back in the swamp, Jan caught up with Erwin and Christie. Distracted by Jan, Erwin fell into one of Yus's traps. At that moment, Yus revealed his plan. He would trade Erwin for his own freedom. Bound and helpless, Erwin pleaded with Christie to escape, but she refused to abandon him. Though forced to march, Erwin cleverly manipulated Yus into carrying him instead. Eventually, they arrived at the abandoned Rottenal prison, which had become a refuge for wild inmates. One prisoner, Jub, who had arrived earlier, spotted a guard there, evidence that Matthias and his men had already reached the area. When Yus and Matthias finally met, they agreed to exchange Erwin for Yus's freedom. But by then, Erwin had already escaped. Using a scanner, Matthias located 2 survivors hiding nearby. Now that Yus was no longer useful, Matthias executed him on the spot. He then killed Jan and threatened to shoot Christie unless Erwin surrendered. At that moment, Erwin received unexpected help from Joab. As Erwin stepped forward to turn himself in, Yus, barely clinging to life, suddenly sprang up and drove a spear through Matthias's head. Since Erwin was too important to be allowed to reach Paradise Island, Yus tried to stop him, but Erwin was determined. This was his only chance to change the system. Yus simply smiled, finally embracing the release of eternal freedom. Christie, unconscious from a tranquilizer dart, only woke up later when they finally reached the shoreline. Paradise Island lay across the water, hidden in mist. Now, they had to find a way to cross, or starve to death. Fortunately, Erwin noticed movement among the smaller islands. They weren't islands at all, but floating plants. Using them as makeshift rafts, they set out toward their destination. Meanwhile, at the prison's control center, the system failures had severed communication with the president. With no reports from Matthias, the captain dispatched more soldiers to hunt down Erwin. 2 days passed without any wind. Their floating island seemed motionless, slowly beginning to sink. Silently, Joab sacrificed himself, just like Yus before him. He felt that his fight was over and chose to embrace eternal freedom. Sometime later, Christie suddenly felt a gust of wind. It came from a plane piloted by the soldiers sent by the captain. The pilot immediately aimed at Erwin and Christie, but at the last moment, the plane's systems shut down. Erwin's virus had completely disabled its controls. Then came the biggest shock. Beyond the mist lay a massive waterfall. Erwin admitted he had never accounted for this, but he wasn't out of ideas. He wrapped himself and Christie tightly to apply Archimedes' principle and survive the fall. After plunging down the waterfall, they finally reached Paradise Island. But to their disappointment, the island was nothing more than barren rock and sand. Only fools would believe happiness awaited there, including Erwin, who looked furious. But his anger wasn't about the lack of paradise. Erwin had realized that the island was actually a secret military base, a bunker for the president. What frustrated him was that he didn't know the final digit of the code required to open the bunker's entrance. Erwin had programmed the system himself, but left the president to input the last number. He had calculated all the possible numbers the president might have used, but there were too many. Worse, they only had 2 attempts before being locked out permanently. This time, Christie was the one who saved the day. She told Erwin to recall the moment the president had entered his code that night. Back then, Erwin had asked the president the same riddle about the price of a chocolate bar. The president's answer was 9 coins. An incorrect answer, but since he was the president, Erwin never dared to correct him. Taking a gamble, Erwin entered 9 as the final digit. The door unlocked. Irvin offered Christie a chance to leave using the bunker's single-seat aircraft, but she refused because she loved him and wanted to stay by his side. The film closes with Irvin and Christie flying away from XT-59 in the aircraft. Christie's narration reveals that they were eventually found by the Federation. Irvin exposed the government's corruption, prompting the Federation to send peacekeeping forces to dismantle the system. The people were freed and lived in peace once again. But tragically, 10 years later, the government established a new system, one even more cruel and oppressive than before. And that's it for the story series of this film. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to support this channel by subscribe, like and share. See you in the next video. Goodbye.